So it is really my pleasure to introduce Dr. TJ Thomson to today. He's a senior lecturer at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, if I have that right, RMIT, in Melbourne, Australia. And he's a very prolific scholar that has focused on visual communication and visual culture, among other areas for nearly a decade now, if not longer. And TJ and I were classmates for a little while at the University of Missouri, and since then he's investigated myriad topics, including the proliferation of visual disinformation, digital manipulation, and AI-generated images, which is, of course, the subject of today's conversation. So the breadth and the depth of his scholarly work is pretty remarkable, and we're really, really happy to have him here today. So please welcome Dr. TJ Thomson, everyone.
Thank you, Alex, for that kind introduction. Thank you all for being here. Lovely to spend some time with you virtually. From far away, it's great we can have this conversation from how far we are away from each other and to have this discussion. I wanted to start out by thanking Alex, Sangjung, and Bingbing for putting this on. I think it shows great initiative to them for having the foresight and the initiative to put this together. Really wonderful event, really wonderful speakers. I've already been able to hear the tail end of Bryce's and Cindy's presentation as well. Really interesting work happening and great to be able to be part of this conversation. I hope they've already mentioned this already, but they're doing this wonderful special issue for VCQ that's coming out later this year. We're really looking forward to seeing that in Q4 of this year. I think we had or have Larry Mullen, editor-in-chief of VCQ, on the call as well. So shout out to Larry and the team for being able to support this work that they're doing. So well done to the three of you for putting this together and doing this special issue in VCQ as well. So just with that acknowledgement out of the way, Alex already mentioned we have this connection from Mizzou, where I went to for grad school. I'm originally from the States, from Denver, Colorado, the Rocky Mountain region. My background was as a photojournalist and designer, doing a little bit of work in corporate comms with design and more kind of news photography with the journalism side of things. Graduated from Mizzou in 2018, moved to Brisbane in 2018, was working at QUT in Brisbane, and then more recently at RMIT in Melbourne, as Alex has said. And I'm the proud Greyhound dad to Leo, their 8-year-old rescue Greyhound. Gives us a lot of joy and life in our little home here in Brisbane. So just a little bit more context about me, and I'm just going to quickly trace a little bit of the work I've been doing in visual mis and disinformation and in generative AI. And then I think I'll spend the bulk of the time chatting through one study in particular, which is the most recent study, looking at how journalists in different newsrooms across different parts of the world are perceiving using generative AI in their newsrooms, and what they see as the opportunities and challenges of this technology for their organizations. So that sounds like an all right plan for us. We can get going from there. So my team and I did this article a few years ago in Journalism Practice, and we tried to make it as visually rich and illustrated as possible with this initial look at some of the different challenges and opportunities that are out there with regard to mis and disinformation. And things have really changed a lot since 2020 when this article was published. And I think Cindy also alluded to that as well, how fast things are moving in this field. So since then, I've also been spending a bit of time and attention on the generative AI landscape. And if you're like me, you might have seen your first AI-generated images on a social media platform. For me, it was what was then Twitter. I was seeing some of my colleagues, my academic colleagues, posting text-to-image generated images like this one here you see on the screen of T.S. Eliot's poetry. So poetry that's written 100+ years ago that's being used to put into a prompt, into a text-image generator prompt like Midjourney, and get a result back in terms of what AI thinks this poetry looks like. So a really interesting kind of experiment to, in a creative way, play with poetry and visualizing poetry in this kind of fun context on Twitter. So that was my first kind of experience with AI images. Being a little bit of a research nerd, I thought, how can we try to put this into the journalism context, and how can we put this into the research context? How can we get publications out of this if possible? So I worked with a colleague at Mizzou at the time, Ryan Thomas, to do a study on what journalists look like. And if for folks who might not have had to play with image prompting so far, you can be as simplistic and as minimalistic or as descriptive and complex with your prompts as you like. So you can tell Midjourney or DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, I want, an image of a person, place, a thing, just a simple noun. I put those prompts up there on the top. So prompt of a journalist, a reporter, a correspondent, the press, news analyst, news commentator, and fact checker. So very simple, minimalistic prompts. Or you can describe in lots of detail with lots of adjectives and that kind of thing. I want to see this particular type of journalist, this gender, this age, this ethnicity, this context, this environment, this light condition. You can get really, really complex with your prompts if you want to. But I was trying to keep it very pared back, very simple to see what AI was doing to fill in the gaps, because AI is doing a lot of heavy lifting to fill in the gaps that we're not necessarily specifying or thinking to specify with our prompts. So I did this little experiment twice. I did it once in about mid-2022 and once early January, February 2023, 6 months later, to see how consistent or inconsistent AI is with its vision and its outputs over time. You can see the default visual style is quite different with version 3 of Midjourney than version 4 of Midjourney. So the version 4 is very much more nitty-gritty, urban, gray, blue, whereas version 3 is a little bit more painterly, it's realistic, more bright colors and warm colors. So a really big visual difference in the style of the images without specifying for any particular visual style. And I'm curious, I think just for the folks who are on the panelist side of things, if I can ask you, any things stand out to you across these images? There's a lot of images here, but if you can look and see what things stand out to you, what kind of patterns or trends do you see with these generations, if I can ask?
Everybody looks pretty white,
Yep.
uh, in
Skin
my
color?
opinion.
Yep. So perhaps a bias there in terms of ethnic background? I think definitely. Not really seeing a lot of visible disabilities. Any other insights or things that pop out immediately?
They don't quite look so real. Some
Yeah,
of
yeah,
them looks like a fake person.
yeah. So still very plasticky, very looking kind of simulated. They don't look very photorealistic yet. This is still earlier technology that's being used. It's not as developed as it is now in 2024. And I think we're also seeing a lot of anachronistic technology in these images. So old school cameras, printing presses, that kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, a modern day journalist doesn't necessarily look that different to a accountant or a banker or a lawyer. Oftentimes we're all just doing work in front of a laptop or a computer. So that AI is trying to show us in very explicit terms, this is journalism we're talking about, and to do it so is having to draw on very aged, old school technology to make the point for us. Also, I think interesting to note is the distribution of women or of female presenting people in the sample. So with the generic roles on the left of the line, they're more or less more women or female presenting people on the left of the line than they are in the specialized roles on the right of the line. So but perhaps a bias in terms of AI thinking or seeing women as not as specialized or as fit to be specialized as men. Bit of an issue there, I think. Also, we can think about age as well. So there are some older people in the sample. You can see some older men with some wrinkles and some gray hair, white hair, but we don't see the women in the sample or the female presenting people in the sample with wrinkles or with gray or white hair. So some ageist also biases happening with these images. This is just one little simple experiment for one study that I think gives us a lot of interesting things to work through in terms of algorithmic bias, in terms of training data, in terms of how these algorithms are learning to work and function based on the data they have to be trained by. So we published that in digital journalism. So if you want the full 9,000 word version, it's there for you. If you want the short little Cliff Notes version, 700 words, we have an article in the conversation with that, with some findings from that early work. That was in 2022. That was focusing on AI generated content. That was kind of the first foray into this space. I want to just pause here and just give a little bit of context about policy development in newsrooms, in journalistic organizations, and how quickly or slowly the policy development is happening. Some of the first policies, public-facing policies I could find from either news organizations or associations for journalists that were publicly facing on how journalists or association members should use or not use generative AI in their newsrooms or associations were in the States and Canada with the News Media Alliance and in Germany with DPA and DJV. So some work happening in North America and Europe with the policy space, but even really big brands like AP trailing months from other kind of early upstarts in like the News Media Alliance and DJV in Germany. New York Times in September didn't have policies, publicly facing policies out yet. It was then at the time hiring for a standards editor to lead the standards generation, the standards for generative AI in the organization. So a lot of work happening very slowly and in interesting ways across these really big players in the landscape. And this is a little bit relevant because the study I'll talk about most in a few minutes is conducted during this time frame from April to October. I was doing interviews with these organizations, not necessarily these organizations, but organizations like these, really big, well-resourced organizations about how they're using generative AI in the newsrooms and what they perceive as the opportunities and challenges of the technology. So that was phase one, looking at AI-generated content. Phase two was kind of getting into the newsrooms and trying to talk to people who are using the content or technology, or who are being exposed to the technology or the content from social media, from users, or who are making decisions about how they use this technology in the newsrooms. So we spoke primarily to photo editors or equivalent, or people who were in charge of AI development or management in the newsroom. Those were the kind of folks we tried to target and prioritize for this second piece of work. The first interviews we did were in Australia, where I'm working, and in the States, where I'm from originally. We published that work in Journalistique, which is a German English language journal. So that's just a really short, quick summary of some findings from Australia and the States. But then I was able to work over in Germany last year for a few months as a fellow at the Weizenbaum Institute in Berlin, and we were able to add to the sample from Australia and the States another 5 countries in Europe: France, Switzerland, Norway, UK, and there's one more that I'm forgetting. I have the flags right there. I said Norway, Germany, France, UK, and Switzerland. Those 5 to the original 2. So 7 countries altogether. And those will be some of the findings I'll share with you shortly. So that just published last night, actually, in Digital Journalism, the findings from the full 7 countries. So if you want, again, the 9,000 word version, that is available now in Digital Journalism as of last night. So that's a little bit of the focus in 2023. Last year was on people who work with AI content in news organizations. So just recapping, 2022, focusing on the content, 2023, focusing on people involved in content production, and 2024, this year, focusing on news audiences. So we oftentimes don't understand or ignore or hear from as much as we should people who are on the receiving end of journalistic content. People who are in the audience side of the equation, what do they perceive, what do they think should be done or not done with generative AI in newsrooms in journalistic contexts? Be back in Germany again, doing a lot of travel in July to September this year as a fellow at KAIS, the Center for Advanced Internet Studies, trying to get some insights from news audiences about what they think the place of generative AI is in journalism. Always happy to collaborate. So if you want to work with me on that project or a different project, send me an email, let me know. Let's have a chat and see what might be possible. That's a little bit of a quick summary of what I've done so far in the generative AI space. I haven't done a lot. It's a really fast evolving space. There's really a lot happening in the space. People have done much more than I have, but just a quick little taster of what I've been doing with generative AI in the last couple of years. So hopefully that sets a bit of context for some of the work we've done, and I can do a little bit of a deep dive now as we have time into this most recent study on how 16 different newsrooms in those 7 countries are grappling with generative AI technologies in the visual side of things. To give you a little bit more context with the sample, so I've already told you about the countries in which these news organizations are housed. I've already alluded to them being quite large organizations, very well-resourced organizations, oftentimes having hundreds or thousands of employees rather than dozens of employees. So really kind of big major players who have national or international audiences primarily. We have one little, not little, but one regional conglomerate to have a little bit of contrast, but primarily they are national and international organizations in the sample. So I've kind of structured the next part into 2 sections, one on challenges, and we'll talk about that first, get all the risks and challenges and all those kind of dirty negative things out of the way first, and then focus up on the opportunities and the more positive, pro-social, creative things we might be able to do with technology later on in the presentation. So challenges, what are the issues as told to me by journalists in these 16 newsrooms across 7 countries? Unsurprisingly, misinformation was the most prevalent concern that journalists had for generative AI in their newsrooms. The World Economic Forum has named the risk of misinformation as the world's greatest short-term risk. And it's quite, I think, astounding they put that risk at the top right now in 2024. They put that risk above armed conflict and natural disasters. We're having heaps of both. We have natural disasters everywhere, almost all around the world. We're having armed conflict, unfortunately, all around the world. And they've put the risk of misinformation even above those other pressing risks for 2024, given it is an election year in so many different countries. So that risk of misinformation is huge in journalists' estimation. A local example here in Australia, we have this news outlet called Crikey, a very Aussie name. On the Adobe Stock platform, they were having images that were AI generated purporting to depict the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and the conflict in Gaza. But they were AI generated, they were not being transparently noted as such, they were not being labeled as such. So you had images that news outlets then in Australia were picking up and using in the news reports, reporting to show this conflict happening that weren't actually showing image that was being captured from the ground. So really kind of distressing and concerning circumstance when you have things that are going onto stock photography platforms like Adobe that aren't being denoted as such. So the second big challenge that journalists told me about in their estimation is the potential for labor displacement or loss of labor, job loss, that kind of thing. That was also quite present in terms of challenges with generative AI. And I think part of this comes to, if we get really nitty-gritty, how cheap it is to use a lot of this technology. So I've been subscribing to Midjourney myself for 2 or 3 years now. They offer an annual plan for personal use for $120, which is not a lot of money. You can be a big corporate enterprise and have an annual plan for all of your employees for commercial use for $1,200 a year. Again, not a huge investment. And if you're doing freelance work for the Times, you might get a day rate of $400 a day. So you can kind of weigh for yourself, I can pay a freelancer to do 3 days of work for me and get, maybe 12 images I'll publish, or I can get Midjourney subscription to have thousands or hundreds of thousands of images for a whole year. Just in raw dollar terms, that doesn't really make sense in terms of raw dollars. But in terms of output and quality of output, I think we can make a definite case that human labor is valuable and that there is, I think, a definite space for human-made content in our information ecosystem. Another challenge, copyright implications. So I kind of hinted at this already, but the way that most generators work, AI generators work, is they are trained from copyrighted data. So Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, those types of generators, they haven't come out and said where they train their data from. They haven't been explicit about it, but we can assume that they are training from large swaths of data online, trawling just lots of different things from Google Images to stock photography databases and more. And a lot of that content is understandably copyrighted. So there are really big question marks that are yet to be answered, that are making their way through the courts in different jurisdictions throughout the world. I think Japan is a bit unique in that it has decided not to enforce copyright on training data for AI outputs. So it's a bit of an outlier and a bit of a unique example, Japan. But we're still kind of waiting and seeing how courts will rule on this issue. I think New York Times suit versus OpenAI is still very much ongoing. So it's very much a space to watch in terms of how copyright implications will manifest for producers and publishers of information who are potentially considering using AI-generated work in their workflows. So primarily either tech folks, computer scientists, that kind of folk, or artists are also trying to fight back by this thing called data poisoning. So you can try to insert these quote unquote poison pixels in your images if you don't want big companies to train their models from your content. Doing this confuses how the models see the image. So we see it and it looks fine to our eyes as humans, but the actual models and the computers that are looking at the images don't see it the same way we do. And it kind of throws them off. So if you have a photo of or an image of a cow, and you put these poison pixels in, the AI might see the image as a pig or an ox or something else that's not a cow, or a car, something completely different, not even an animal. So it really can confuse and sow a lot of issues for the big companies who are indiscriminately scraping things on the web. So we'll see how much data poisoning takes hold in the coming months or years. If that's kind of just a thing that could be possible and doesn't really get used, or if it does get used a lot more in the coming months, we'll have to see. I should also just note that there are two really big players who are exceptions in terms of the copyright risk question. So Adobe Firefly and Getty have both made a point of distinction in the market by saying we're only going to train our models on data that we either own or have licensed to use. So in terms of the legal risk of copyright infringement, Firefly from Adobe and Getty's AI generator are much less legally risky compared to your Midjourney, Stable Diffusions, and those types of generators. So it's also good to point out there are challenges with copyright, but there are also industries that are trying to progressively work with the challenges of copyright by training on their own data. That's a good thing, but then there's also kind of flow-on effects from that. One of those flow-on effects being Firefly, for example, from Adobe, is only training from its stock photography database. It's not training from its editorial database. So for example, my partner and I trying to generate images of Donald Trump or other celebrities, and it couldn't return images of Trump or other celebrities because it's drawing from a stock photography database, not from an editorial database. So interestingly, it really limits what you can generate images of. If you want kind of just stock images and you want just people looking generic, that's fine. It can do that for you, but it can't necessarily do celebrities and politicians if it doesn't have those images in its existing stock photography database. So training data, really important, I think, is one of the key themes we're trying to drive home here. All right, another challenge. As Cindy and others have already mentioned in this session, it is really difficult or sometimes even impossible to detect with naked vision or even computer technology when something is manipulated, forged, edited unethically, really, really difficult here. Another example I can just throw into the mix, you might have seen this one online floating around recently, little video, I think 15 seconds or so, of former US President Obama, and we'll just have a little listen here.
Some people are losing their minds because the video below would be AI generated. I'm also a deep fake, and you should take care when you watch a video on the internet. See you soon.
So deepfakes, I think, have advanced and evolved a lot since a year or two ago. You used to have just a very, very, very kind of stable head, and the bottom part of the body didn't move much. You didn't have people blinking, but now we have Obama blinking, we have him moving around, you can see some shoulder movement, that kind of thing, a lot more dynamic and engaging and more convincing fake here. There are still little tells potentially, so I'll show you kind of a little key frame by key frame comparison here. If we just advance to the next video and show you this one, I slowed the video down a lot. You can see Obama's wrinkles disappear if you slow it down, look at the image or the video frame by frame. So there's not always going to be those tells, there's not always going to be those little inconsistencies, as Cindy has already said and alluded to, but sometimes if you do look closely and carefully and slow things down, you can pick up on little inconsistencies. Now, of course, your everyday consumer isn't going to do this. They're not going to take the time to slow it down, look at it frame by frame. That's not how we normally watch and engage with video content. But if you do need to try to verify things, having a little bit of time to forensically analyze it and evaluate it can sometimes be helpful. Cindy also kind of mentioned some of the tools out there. There's not one solution, as she said, and I agree with that position. There are tools. This one was developed in Europe, the We Verify plugin. But it can generate false positives. It can be thrown off by really overexposed parts of the image, by really textured parts of the image. It's also developed for looking at images in mass, not necessarily at single images. So there's lots of different constraints and issues with these tools. And it does require a assemblage of different approaches to try to look at provenance and authenticity. Speaking of provenance, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Adobe's Content Authenticity Initiative and its content credentials. Really a lot of work happening in this space as well. And I was able to kind of go back to the data. I was able to talk to my participants about, have you heard of CAI? Have you heard of content credentials? If so, what are your thoughts? Not a lot of the photo editors I talked to had heard of it or are using it in their newsrooms. I think only about 3 of the 20 interviewees are using it or are kind of working toward using it. So a relative minority in the sample at this point who are using it or working toward using it. I think part of the reason why there's that lack of adoption is just how much investment in capital it takes to be able to make this work at every level. So if you think about making images, it requires cameras, and the cameras we already have probably in our newsrooms aren't equipped with content credentials. So you have to buy new gear, and Alex can appreciate this, other people who are photographers can appreciate this. We invest a lot of money in our gear, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars between camera bodies and lenses and all sorts of peripherals. So if you have to buy new cameras for a newsroom that has perhaps many staff, you're a national broadcaster, you're a big outlet, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars you're investing in new gear that have content credentials embedded in them. Then you have to think about, we have new cameras now that can do this technology. We now think about our DAMs, our digital asset management system. Does our DAMs work with content credentials? Do we have to rejig the DAMs? Probably we do. That's going to be a lot of developers' time to be able to work with the new credentials and make them work with our existing workflows. Once we've gotten that all worked out, we have to think about our website, and we have to think about how can our website be rejigged and developed anew to accommodate content credentials. That's, again, really a massive investment of time and capital for organizations to redevelop their website. And then you have to think about, at the end of the day, are people going to even see this content on our website? Are they going to see it on a third-party platform? Are third-party platforms on social media going to also integrate content credentials so that audiences can see what we do with our content on those end-use sites? So it's a lot of considerations, a lot of steps, a lot of investment of money at each stage of the process for perhaps a little payoff if people aren't seeing them at the end of the day or know what they are at the end of the day. So a lot of issues here to work through in terms of implementation and effectiveness here. but perhaps a little glimmer of hope if we can think about investment in these organizations and investment in media literacy. Perhaps these could help us on our journey toward authenticity and provenance in coming years. But a fair few issues to work through before we get there, I think. We've already kind of touched on algorithmic bias already, looking at that example from what do journalists look like in terms of ethnic bias, in terms of age bias, in terms of ability bias, in terms of specialized versus non-specialized bias, and gender. I think environment's also another one. All those images were mostly urban environments. We didn't see kind of country settings and rural environments. We saw lots of urban cityscapers and skyscrapers and that kind of thing. But a way that some generators are working toward addressing issues of bias is through this thing called a wrapper. That's the technical term, wrapper with a W, W-R-A-P-P-E-R. So they're trying to put in some code that lies between the prompt. So the user puts a prompt in, and there's the wrapper in the middle that kind of mediates the input, and then the output is whatever the generator spits out in response. So the wrapper sits in the middle between the user and the model. And in this case, this is allegedly from a leaked bit of source code from ChatGPT. It's asking the generator to try to use different ethnic backgrounds, with equal probabilities, to try to show people from Caucasian, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, South Asian, white descents in equal probability. Now, on paper, in theory, that sounds good because we want our algorithms and our AI to be representative. We don't want to just show white folks and light-skinned folks. We want to see lots of diversity in terms of ethnic diversity, in terms of other types of diversity, as I've already mentioned. In theory, that's a good thing. But if we start to stop and think a bit more critically, this can become a little bit problematic. For example, Google Gemini, its AI generator, image generator, had Black Nazis and Asian Nazis. And historically, that's quite inaccurate to have Black and Asian Nazis. So Google received widespread criticism for its Gemini generator. It had to actually pause the ability of the generator to render human outputs because of all the flack and pushback it was getting and all the inaccuracies it was getting with the outputs. It was trying to be too woke, quote unquote, and it kind of flopped. So again, I think this speaks to Cindy's point about trying to technologically make a technological solution to a human issue. You have to think about humans in the loop. You can't just think about technology and machines and how machines are seeing things, and you can't just make it all work with a nice bit of pretty code. So something to consider here in terms of algorithmic bias, a very big challenge, I think, indeed. There's also potentially reputational risk for using these technologies or using them in less than thoughtful ways, let's say. So a few examples here of this risk. This one is also local from here in Australia. We had a federal politician named Georgie Purcell. She's still with us, thankfully. She's down in Victoria. And we had this Channel 9 television broadcast show her on the right there with a image showing her midriff, wearing kind of crop top with the midriff showing, but she actually wasn't showing her midriff in real life. The image, the source image, you can see that on left there, she was wearing a full-length dress without any midriff exposed at all. So what happened here was Channel 9, television broadcaster here, used a tool, a feature, a function in Photoshop called Generative Expand, and it did so to generatively expand the image to make the image bigger to better fit the newscast. In doing so, Photoshop had to imagine what the person was wearing beneath the frame, and it created this midriff that wasn't true to life to what the politician was actually wearing. So I can show you that here if you haven't had to play with it yourself in Photoshop, Generative Expand. This really matters. I think the composition and the cropping are really important here. So if you have a really tightly cropped or composed image to start with, and you try to expand it a lot, Photoshop has to imagine a lot more and to fill in a lot more of the blanks about what is happening on the rest of the image that you're trying to expand and have it imagine. So we have this tightly cropped photo here that it said it used. We'll see here. So instead of cropping in, we'll crop out, make it a little bit larger. It has a bit of time to generate. It'll give you 3 generations by default. First one looks, fairly normal, but then you have a midriff there in the second one, and a bit of midriff in the third one as well, third variation there. So that's more or less what 9 did, use Generative Expand to make the image bigger, and in doing so, it introduced this inaccuracy with what she was wearing and how she was being represented. People called out 9 for making her more sexualized, the image more sexualized. It got a lot of flack. It didn't have, enough standards in place for how these tools should be used. So I'm not saying be scared of them, never use them. They're all bad, but I think when we do use them, we need to have policies and thoughtful approaches in place before we start having a play with the images in public for audiences. Another example here, this one's not in a journalism context, but more in a creative industries or marketing context. We have an orchestra here, the Queensland Symphony Orchestra in Queensland, and it has a concert coming up on Facebook. It made a mention of this concert and said, hey, buy tickets for a new concert coming up, next week or next month. Buy tickets down below, here's the link. And it used an AI-generated image to illustrate the concert to a lot of ridicule and a lot of scorn. People were really outraged that an arts organization wasn't paying other artists to make images for it, but was instead turning to this very cheap source like Midjourney to make an image really quickly and cheaply, and it's kind of outsourcing that labor to a machine rather than to a human. And they got a lot of flack for this that made the news here for them using this AI-generated image instead of paying a photographer to go out and make the image. There's obviously inconsistencies you can see here. The orchestra is behind the couple in the audience. It's in the audience itself rather than on the stage. The number of fingers is all off. The woman's dress kind of appears magically on the other person's body. Lots of really weird things happening in this image. Not a very thoughtful use of AI by any means. So there can be reputational damages depending on how you use technology and how it's perceived by your audience. So that's another kind of risk that my participants were telling me about. Okay, so there's some of the challenges from that latest research. We've gotten through some of the hard and heady risks and challenges. We can also talk a little bit about some opportunities at this point too. So some more pro-social, creative, innovative ways of using this technology, hopefully for good. So my participants were most comfortable using generative AI technology for illustrations. These are things that are clearly not photorealistic. So very much a painterly style or a non-representative style. It can still show a person or a place or an object, but not in a photorealistic high definition way. So an example of this is this article I wrote for the conversation last year. 2023 was the year when ChatGPT and generative AI kind of became household words. So it wasn't just an academic thing anymore. It was your mom or your grandma started talking about, I'm using ChatGPT, or I'm asking, this bot a question, or that kind of thing. We're seeing it a lot more in public discourse in 2023. That was really kind of a watershed year. What can we expect in 2024, this year? To illustrate this article, my colleague and I used generative AI. We used Midjourney to create an image to have a hero image for this article. I think you can clearly tell it's not a photorealistic image. It's not been made with the camera. It is clearly made by AI. And there are, I think, certain topics that suit themselves better to being illustrated with AI than others. My participants were talking about a lot of finance journalism. A lot of finance number stories are very hard to illustrate visually. You can only take so many photos of the front of a bank or the sign of a bank, that kind of thing. And so if you're doing a story about Bitcoin or Credit Suisse or whatever it is, maybe you need, or maybe you have the opportunity to use AI to illustrate in a non-realistic way, a non-photorealistic way, some stories or some aspects about finance and about banking and about that kind of topic. So that was one opportunity, using illustrations in a non-photorealistic way with AI. Another, I think, pretty comfortable place a lot of people are playing with and being in these days is using AI for brainstorming and ideation. This applies as well, not just to text, but also to the visual side of things. So if you ask, for example, Google Gemini, hey Gemini, help me brainstorm ideas for how to visualize the Mariana Trench for a news story. So the Mariana Trench, one of the deepest places in the world. Very few people have ever been down there. Very few people have ever seen it with their own eyes. It'd be really hard to try to document with the camera. It'd be very dark, not a lot going on, I imagine. So how do you visualize this story for a news audience? Well, it gives you a few different ideas. Maybe you show it next to the Burj Khalifa, the big skyscraper in Dubai, and give people a more familiar reference to say, this is how tall this thing is, this is how tall the trench is, how do they compare in terms of size? That could be one option that you go with. Or you might be able to do a layered illustration where you show, here's different segments of the ocean, here's the animals, the flora, the fauna that live in each part of the ocean as you get deeper and deeper. That could be another way to show this to an audience. So a way to try to get some inspiration for how to visualize a story. Either if you're doing it with cameras or with illustration, graphic design, either way, you might be able to turn to AI for some inspiration. So old school, you might be doing Google Image or Pinterest boards. Maybe now we're doing a little bit more of asking a bot for some help and some suggestions. We've already kind of mentioned that AI can be quite quick, can be quite fast. So there's the efficiency thing, it's quite self-explanatory. We've already mentioned also the cost factor. It oftentimes is very cheap in terms of the investment. Using AI tools at this stage, One of the outlets in France that I spoke to said that they use a lot of graphic designers to illustrate their content. They do a lot of bespoke illustrations and designs with these designers, and they see themselves in 2024 using them not as much, if at all. We'll obviously use some AI, they say, because it's much cheaper. The results almost the same, if not better for them in their estimation. And the editor I spoke to was kind of worried about their jobs. So really kind of a grim, sad little anecdote there about labor displacement, about labor implications of generative AI for workers in the newsroom. But there's also opportunities for using AI for infographics and data visualization, I think. So it used to be that AI just worked with text to text, but now we have text to image, text to video, I think text to image based on not just necessarily text, but also data sets. So more kind of spreadsheets to image. That can also be some kind of way that we can use AI in a potentially different way. So you can ask Gemini, for example, if there already is public data out there, can you show me, for example, the world population from 1990 to 2000? Show me a little chart that shows that change in population of the world from this year to this year. Now, Google Gemini could do this for me, but it couldn't always do it if I put in other date ranges. So I asked it for different dates to have a bit of a play around, and it didn't always give me accurate information. So do always fact check and double check the results. Don't kind of just take it as gospel, whatever it says. But if there already are publicly available stats out there, it might be able to get a simple chart or visualization for you easily and quickly. In Photoshop, in Illustrator, and Premiere, you're seeing AI being embedded in these very popular industry standard tools. So it used to be that you had to go to a Discord server if you're using Midjourney, or go to another server online to put in a prompt and get it an output back. And it was a little bit of a process. Now you're getting the opportunity to have generative AI embedded in your tools you use day to day as a journalist. So you might use Photoshop to edit photos and crop photos and that kind of thing every day. You also have an opportunity now to have generative fill in Photoshop, where you can type in and add whatever you want to with Photoshop. Or here, Illustrator, you can create little simple icons and graphics and that kind of thing that you might then put into bigger compositions, doing infographics, that kind of thing. Any folks remember when Notre Dame was on fire, sadly, a few years ago? If you saw that New York Times article about it, you saw that beautiful 3D model it had of the cathedral. It kind of scrolled around and zoomed in and zoomed out as you scrolled through the parallax experience on that article. And I don't know for sure, but I imagine a lot of human labor and time was invested into that model, creating that 3D realistic model of the cathedral. If not now, I can imagine in a few months or years being able to upload architectural drawings or schematics or blueprints into an image generator, into ChatGPT or equivalent, and have it spit out a 3D model in return. So instead of having to painstakingly manually create this 3D model, maybe you can upload the schematics and have AI do some of that heavy lifting for you. Just kind of efficiency multiplying, making your work faster. You're still involved in the process, obviously, still kind of checking things, making sure it's all accurate, but perhaps getting some of that heavy lifting done for you by AI. Also, two other interesting opportunities using AI to visualize past or future. So people might feel a bit uncomfortable with using AI to visualize the present, try not to mislead or deceive folks, but if you can use it to visualize the distant past or the far distant future, maybe that's a little bit more comfortable for folks as well. So just a silly little example of this, State Library of Western Australia put in a little search term, finding a ship, got this image from 100+ years ago, maybe I think 200 years ago, the ship, the Sydney, got this image and put it into a text to video generator called Runway, and asked that generator to kind of animate the image for me. So the free version is only limited to 4 seconds. It's a very fast, very short time frame. You can pay for longer generations. But you can see here, it gives it a little bit of motion, a little bit of dynamism. If we just play this 4-second animation, the waves start rolling, the ship kind of moves a little bit. It gives it a little bit more life and dynamism. So if you're illustrating a story about what it was like to travel, by boat 200 years ago, maybe you do have some kind of dynamic image at the top of the story, maybe a bit more engaging than just a still image, perhaps. I don't think you're necessarily misleading people. I don't think they would be fooled that there was a camera here 200 years ago, a video camera recording this. I think you'd play safe in this instance. So this could be an example of how you could use AI to visualize the past, perhaps, or to visualize or augment the past. In the future, there's also an example I can share if we have time in the Q&A, but we might just forego that for now. Fewer people overall in my sample were comfortable using AI to replace stock photos. Some people were comfortable, but the majority were not. AI is getting better at rendering hands, from the example we saw just a few slides ago with the concert and people's hands on the concert goers' laps, to in 2024, now we see a lot better fidelity of anatomical features of bodies, of hands, that kind of thing. You have 5 fingers on both hands, what we expect to see. A lot better rendering of details and anatomical features of bodies. So some news outlets are saying I can see myself using this in terms or in place of stock photography. It's not very different for me. They wouldn't replace photojournalism with it, but they would replace potentially stock photography with AI, perhaps. There's also an opportunity, especially for larger outlets, to have your own models. So you can't do this if you're a little small mom and pop shop, but if you are the New York Times, if you are a really big billion-dollar or multi-million-dollar organization, you can create your own models, you can train your own models with your own data. That way you own copyright to your own outputs. That's a really nice, slick system to have, to be able to kind of draw on your own data, create new data with your existing data, not have to kind of outsource things to third-party companies. So that's another opportunity that participants are talking about in kind of the landscape of the bigger outlets out there in the world. And that's just a whirlwind of challenges, opportunities, risks in generative AI and journalism. I think we have roughly 12 minutes or so for Q&A or so, maybe 10 or so minutes.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll get to a few questions, and I want everybody in the audience to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll just try to get to as many of those audience questions as we can. Thank you so much, TJ. That was quite, we covered some real ground in a very short amount of time, and I really appreciate that. I think we have one already from Brian Eckdale here, who says, historically, media industries are very precarious. On top of that, journalists tend to be quite cynical. When you talk to folks who currently earn a living making images, photographers, graphic designers, about the opportunities you presented here, what kind of response have you gotten?
Thank you for the question, Brian, Alex. Thank you for that. You both. I think there is a little bit of a quite disparate and distinct perception between photo editors and photographers. I haven't interviewed any photographers in this particular piece of research. I've just interviewed management, so photo editors and AI editors and that kind of thing. And they're giving me their perception, and I think they're a little bit perhaps callous with labor. I think that quote from France kind of illustrates that point, that, well, we pay people right now, but we don't have to necessarily do that next year. And that's, I'm sad for the jobs, but at the end of the day, it's cheaper, and I have to think about the bottom line as a manager. I think it's a bit callous. I think we'd hear a very different perspective if we heard from the photographers and the image-based workers on the ground who are in this space. So I think if people are interested in this topic, do research, talk to folks, not just in management, but talk to folks on the ground with cameras who are making images day to day for a living, and hear their perspectives. I think that'd be a really rich way of augmenting what we know already in this space.
To touch on that again, it's been controversial when photojournalists use AI to tell post-photography stories. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about your take on projects like 90 Miles by Michael Christopher Brown. Hugh Kretzmer has been using this for a long time. He's not in the photojournalism space, but as well as Jonas Bendixson, if you remember from 2019, The Book of Ellis, where he intentionally manipulated or deceived audiences. When somebody's so close to the photojournalism, and then they're going off and telling these stories, is there space for that? Do you see anything that I don't know, I guess, what's your just opinion on that in general?
Thank you, Alex. I think I'm a bit pessimistic. I think there's probably more harm than good in those applications. I think that the danger here is the photorealistic generations. I think if we're more painterly, more surreal, more abstract, I think there's a little bit more leeway. I think people can kind of see and appreciate this is similar to animation. This is similar to other types of media that I might see in film or popular culture. I think there's a little bit more leeway for that kind of thing. But I think in terms of photorealistic generations and photojournalists using this technology, I think there is quite little leeway and quite little latitude. I think one of the things just to kind of mention we haven't already is generators are really good at generating generic people. So you're who knows who they are, they look like whoever you want them to look like, but they don't really they can't really do generations properly and accurately of local people, local stories, local places. They really struggle with that because there's not enough training data of images of me or you or anyone else in the Zoom. We're not famous enough and enough prominence enough to have enough training data to represent ourselves accurately through AI. So I think you have to kind of ask yourself, in terms of representativeness, who's being shown, who's not being shown, how elite are they, how not elite are they? And I think that's a good thing to think about, yeah.
How many subtle stereotypes can be inside of these models every chance? We're talking about huge biases that you can spot from a mile away, but there's subtle cues that we haven't really got to yet, as well. Hey, audience, please feel free to send all your questions our way, and if not, I'll just keep on asking. So you talked to a lot of editors, and they hadn't really implemented a lot of detection tools yet in the newsroom in your recent research. In your opinion, why is that not the forefront of everyone's mind? You saw that the public-facing policy was lagging. Why aren't they using, the visual tools that so many people have that are internet-based, active or passive detection methods right now?
I think the simple and short answer is time. I think photo editors, like many journalists, are just flat out with time. They don't have an abundance or luxury of time. They have to rely on trusted sources, so the wire services or their own photographers or their own trusted vetted freelancers. They go at those sources if they can, and try to prioritize them for making new content. I think other people in the newsroom might be relying more on user-generated content, and they just don't have time, I think, to individually verify and vet each image that comes through. We see 3.6 billion photos a day that are being shared, 700,000 hours of video a day that are being shared. You just don't have time as a human to work with that kind of scale and volume and pace of data. So I think maybe AI and machines can help us a little bit perhaps in that space, but it's also not just something we can relegate entirely to AI machines. We have to have humans involved in this process too, but it's just, I think, a matter of time.
Hey, Bing Bing, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm curious, when you are interviewing those journalists, have they ever mentioned about how do they think they should be responsibly use AI in their journalistic practice? Or like whether they have think about the ethics part about using generative AI? Because you mentioned that they have the thinking about the challenge of reputation risk, like those and the biases, but do they think about like moving forward, like how they should responsibly use it?
Thank you, Bing Bing. Excellent question. I think the concern about misinformation, misleading or deceiving audiences was quite prevalent. So I think they do have that concern about not wanting to deceive people. I think another thing that's also just good to mention, the interviews also had a bit of a focus on what are your policies like? And if you don't have policies in place, what are the principles that would inform your policies? I don't think we have time right now to get into that nuance in detail, but if you want to look at the digital journalism piece that was published yesterday, that does report on what are the policies in place from these news organizations, and if they don't have policies, what are the principles they're trying to draw on or identify. So I think that's a good place to start, is thinking about principles, if not policies. And Pointer just created this new template in the last week or so. If you are a newsroom who doesn't have a policy in place, Pointer has this template about how to think through some questions to make your own policy. So I think that's a good resource to mention as well.
Cool,
So,
thank you.
looks like we have another one in the chat here from Ado. She says, what ethical concerns are there regarding AI/GI use in journalistic practice and the growing concerns of visual misinformation? And you laid out a few of those, but what haven't we covered kind of yet, do you think?
I think just maybe focusing on the viewing conditions. If you think about the person who's on the other end looking at content on their smartphone, you're scrolling through seeing dozens, hundreds of posts, an hour or a minute, however fast you scroll. You're seeing really small posts. It's not all of context. You just kind of click or expand oftentimes to see more caption information, that kind of thing. So I think you're just missing a lot of detail and context when you're kind of looking at things fast online on your phone. So even if people are marking images as AI generated in the caption, you're not necessarily guaranteed that people do read the caption, see the caption, know what that means. So I think you can't really assume how people are encountering and understanding or perceiving what they're seeing online. So I think we have to kind of always be cognizant and aware of the audience perspective and who's seeing the content we're making.
Absolutely. So TJ, I want to hear from Mary Bach. She was wondering if this kind of research means that visual scholars need to start doing more policy-based questions. What are your thoughts about government and political economic research in our realm?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for joining the session. Thank you for the question. I do think there is space for that work, definitely. I think from being, I don't know if this is unique to Australia, if this is quite common in the States, but where I've worked in the last two institutions, it has really prioritized interdisciplinary research, and I'm sure that's becoming more and more common everywhere, but at least at my two organizations, QT and RMIT, they really prioritize interdisciplinary collaborations. So if you can work with people in your law school or your business faculty or whatever the different departments are in your university, I think you can really start to think about these topics and bring together a lot of unique disciplinary expertise. So in our case, journalism, media, communications with law, governance, regulation, really a beautiful pairing that you can bring together and say, how can we team up, join forces, and tackle an issue that's really relevant to both of our communities in a way that we haven't really been able to do before because we haven't had that disciplinary language or the methods, or for whatever reason, haven't had that conversation before. So I definitely think, yes, interdisciplinary research is great. Bringing together more focus on policy, governance, regulation, very important. The EU is leading, I think, in the EU policy space right now. I think Australia is the back of the pack. So I think there is work for governments to do as well in terms of regulating this technology.
TJ, can I ask a follow-up question? So I'm wondering, is the news organization they are following those AI regulation policies is based on the government, like EIU, like those like the blueprint, like White House and publisher like the policy, and based on that adopted from there, or like do they have their own policies that they want to regulate their own organizations?
Good question. I think it's a bit of both is the short answer. I think news organizations are obligated to obviously respond to government mandates. So if there is an executive order they have to comply with, they'll, I think, of course, do that for obvious reasons. But I think they also have unique considerations and aspects that they want to attend to for their own audiences. I think that's also where the audience side comes into play. We don't really know what audiences want or expect or are comfortable with, I think, enough. So I think doing that research on the audience side of the equation can then inform policy development. We can get a better sense from audiences what they expect and want and are comfortable with. We can then feed that back to newsrooms, who can then hopefully inform their policy development on this topic.
Right. I think we got probably time for just a little more since we started a little bit late. And so if anybody has any questions, please put those into the chat. I wanted to pick your brain about how AI generated images is going to affect the aesthetics, the style of photojournalism. You already mentioned once that you'd have to use more trusted sources as AI generated or user generated content becomes harder and harder. Does that mean that we're going to see a regression back to parachute journalism from the trusted sources, the ones that could be vetted? And also, if we're seeing hyper-realistic images all around the media sphere, is that something that photojournalism might grow into?
Good question. It's hard to answer, I think, without seeing a concrete example of what is hyper-realistic, because if that example we can kind of brainstorm and be a bit more concrete, that would help. I think it is a little bit of a double-edged sword in some ways. In some senses, like having freelancers as an organization because it gives you more diverse staffers, because oftentimes you only can pay 5 or 6 staffers and they might not be that diverse. And so if you have freelancers, they can cover different attributes and aspects and demographics better than your on a payroll staff. But then it's also the kind of the flip side is that those freelancers don't necessarily have connection to communities they're parachuting into, which is a very big problem. So there can be benefits of freelance labor in that it can be more diverse, but there's also drawbacks in terms of lack of continuity and lack of trust and lack of accountability to communities. So I think those two things have to be weighed very carefully. I think some freelancers do have those connections to communities and particular demographic identities, and those can be prioritized and worked through in a bit more nuance than others. But I think it is a little bit of a nuanced issue, yeah.
Yeah, and with regards to style, which I'm so focused on, is we're seeing AI generated commercials all the time, the famous one in the Super Bowl. And if we see culturally, socially, a preference for AI generated images that don't have any sort of, indexical truth to the reality, how could that possibly change what our preference for any type of visual could be? Or, I don't know, maybe photojournalism will create a rift where it goes into the less hyper-realistic kind of versions, which is ultra-saturated imagery, which gets controversial all the time in photo competitions when they've changed the saturation, the contrast, all of the clarity, so much so that we're getting into this realm of almost digital art. I don't know, it's a very strange space to be in right now.
It is. I think what AI is doing is two things. It's removing potentially the need for specialized equipment on one hand, and on the other hand, a need for specialized literacy on the other hand. And so if you think about portrait mode on iPhone or equivalent, I think that's a perfect example. To get portrait mode, to get shot at the field, if you are using a camera, an old school camera, you have to think about focal length of the lens, you have to think about camera to subject distance, you have to think about aperture values. And now you don't have to think about any of that at all. You don't have to have a special fancy $1,000 lens. You can just use software to simulate that shot at the field for you without any awareness or acknowledgement of all the optics and light technology going on behind the scenes. So it's very much, I think, democratizing access to equipment and access to literacy that had to be required in previous generations. And that can be a positive or negative thing, depending on how you look at it.
Okay, let's see. One more question, anyone? I guess I'll ask one final wrap up. Since 1986, theorists like Fred Richman have been saying there needs to be more emphasis on the human behind the camera operator here. And do you think, images, photographs as visual, as actual evidence they've lasted through the digital revolution? Do you think that this as an arbiter of social truth, still images are going to survive this one? And do you think we're going to have to return to find ways to highlight that human, that person behind the camera?
Thank you, Alex, for the question. I should just mention at the start, if you are interested in questions of witnessing and evidence, check out Professor Mary Bloch's book, Witnessing. Excellent recommendation, excellent book to all scholars. Yes, that's an excellent topic and excellent book. Yes, I'm all for more focus on the person behind the lens. I think that's an excellent kind of focus to have. And I lost my train of thought. Apologies, Alex. Can you repeat the question for me? Apologies for my
there's been a constant call of putting more emphasis on the human behind the lens because it has some proxy version of embodied witnessing of that event there that AI has severed. Are still images maybe? Are they going to, or a video, are they going to survive this as an arbiter of social reality?
Thank you, Alex. A few examples you might be able to draw on or to provide here. Silly things like Uber Eats. If you order Uber Eats, you still get a photo saying your delivery has been delivered in this location. You get a photo to verify that. You have telehealth. You have doctors examining you remotely, trusting that what they're seeing is in a photo is real. You obviously have a stake in showing them an accurate representation so that they can give you better advice and better prognoses. But you have also sensors in cars who are relying on information from cameras to make decisions about objects in the environment, other people in the environment, to try to avoid harm and avoid risk in how you drive a driverless car. So I think we are still having to rely on images, still moving, definitely. That's not going away. There's not a replacement for them. So I think that's the best thing we have to reality at this point still. Maybe something else will change in the future, but I think at this point, that's the best thing we have.